My name is Lillian Sylvester, and I'm the Administrative Secretary of the office. And with me are Ms. Karen Regis, who is the Project Coordinator. I have two Imani trainees who are professionals in their own right because they provide much technical support for the office. And we have Mr. Branch, who is attached to the Ministry of Legal Affairs. And he is here this morning to speak to you about the Constitution Reform, what is the Constitution Reform is all about, to answer the questions you have, and to give you information as to where we are with Constitution Reform in Grenada.
Okay, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you on the issue of Constitution Reform. Now, let me begin by asking how many of you have heard of Constitution Reform? And so I'd like to go through some of the recommendations that have been made. And when this referendum comes next year, you would have the opportunity to vote for or against these changes, because we're not giving you all the changes so that you vote yes or no on everything. So regarding the 12 recommendations, if you like 5, you can vote in favor of them. The others that you do not like, you can vote against them. Firstly, one of the more important recommendations had to do with the delinking from the Privy Council as our final appellate court and acceding to the appellate jurisdiction of the Caribbean Court of Justice. All this means is that in Grenada, we have a hierarchy of courts. So, if a crime is committed, let's say someone is charged for the offense of murder, there is a preliminary inquiry in the magistrate's court, and if the magistrate finds that there's a case to answer, the case goes to the High Court. And there's a jury that will deliberate on the issues. If the person is found guilty, he can apply to the Court of Appeal. And if at the Court of Appeal level, the court upholds the conviction, they can apply to the Privy Council. And the same thing in civil cases. If you're dissatisfied with the result of a case at the High Court, you can appeal to the Court of Appeal. And if you're still dissatisfied with the result of the Court of Appeal, you can appeal to the Privy Council. In my view, one of the reasons, or probably the key issue that makes the CCJ more appealing as our final court is the fact that going to the Privy Council is an extremely expensive exercise. So that is why over the last 40 years, there have only been about 18 cases going to the Privy Council. And the persons going to the Privy Council are those who can afford to do so. So that's big business people. The cost to go to the Privy Council is at least $100,000. And that was confirmed to me by someone who was contemplating going to the Privy Council in the 80s. Now it has gone up, sometimes as much as $200,000, $250,000. One of my colleagues was reporting to me recently that she had a case she wanted to take to the Privy Council on behalf of one of her clients. And the lawyers were going to give her a discount. And the best discount that they could get was £40,000. So that gives you an idea that the Privy Council is not accessible. There are those who argue that they prefer to have the Privy Council, but in essence, the Privy Council is not your court. You can't go to the Privy Council unless you have that kind of money. So that is why we are seeking to, or proposing to, have to replace the Privy Council with the Caribbean Court of Justice, which is based in Trinidad and Tobago. And the quality of judges and the quality of the court is no less than the quality of the judges and the court in the United Kingdom. Because in fact, you'll be interested to know that a few of the judges on the Caribbean Court of Justice are also members of the Privy Council. So that is important that you understand that. You will hear more about these arguments as the public education campaign of the committee goes forward. So next year, you'll have a chance to vote on this issue as to whether you think Grenada should accede to the appellate jurisdiction of the CCJ. Another issue that might interest you is the whole issue of the name of the state of Grenada. Of course, you know the state is Grenada, but Grenada includes Carriacou and Petit-Matic. Many times we hear the politicians or people speaking about Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Matic. We say Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Matic, but that is not the official name of the state. The name of the state is Grenada. And for many years, the people in Carriacou and Petit-Matic have been making the case that they feel left out from national development. That Carriacou and Petit-Matic are separated from Grenada by a large body of water. Decisions are made in Grenada, they're not part of it. When we interact with them, they say to us that we would like to be more involved in nation building. And we would like the names of Carriacou and Petit-Matic to be added to our official document, which is the passport. And that's all they're asking. So we're asking that you give support to this idea, that we can include Carriacou and Petit-Matic in the official name of the state, so that after the referendum, the state of Grenada be officially called Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit-Matic. There is, of course, precedent in other Caribbean islands on this issue. We look to south to Trinidad and Tobago. They could have decided to call it Trinidad, but they wanted to include the people from Tobago. We have St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have St. Kitts Nevis. We have Antigua Barbuda. And even the country that gave us our Constitution in 1973, 1974, the official name of England is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So, why are we afraid then to include Carriacou and Petit-Matic on our official document? Another issue we're looking at is the whole issue of substituting Commissioner of Police or Chief of Police, because our Constitution recognizes Chief of Police. We wanted to change this. This is not a major change. You may say it's editorial or tidying up our Constitution. And that's one issue we ask you to give your support to. Recommendation 4 deals with, it is stated that there shall be recognized, respected, and adhered to as fundamental essentials of parliamentary and democracy and good governance, the independence of the judiciary, the separation of powers, particularly for protecting the judiciary from the parliament and the executive and the rule of law. All this means essentially is that we want to expressly say that there shall be the separation of powers. I won't spend much time discussing this issue. The other issue has to deal with, again, you may decide that this is an editorial change, adding the E in Petit-Matic. Because of course, as I would have referred to before, our Constitution was made by Englishmen. They weren't very knowledgeable about French, and so the E was left out in Petit-Matic. And the people of Petit-Matic have been saying to us, while we're doing Constitution reform, let's add the E. So it will be P-T-I-T-E, to have the correct spelling. I want to go forward and not spend too much time discussing recommendation 7 and 8, but to spend some time discussing recommendations 9 and 10, which in my view are some of the more fundamental changes that we are proposing. And when we look at those two proposals, we realize that, in fact, the changes we are seeking to effect are more than 12, because recommendation 9 has 11 sub-issues under it, and recommendation 10 has 10 sub-issues. And I'll go through them quickly. Recommendation 9 deals with the refinement of the fundamental rights and freedoms. Now, this is very important because the whole issue of fundamental rights and freedoms became very central to development of nations after the Second World War. You would have probably seen movies on the Second World War and see the violence of that time, people killing one another, what happened in Nazi Germany, and the atrocities conflicting on the Jews, etc. And the nations of the world met in Paris in 1948 and came up with a Bill of Rights, essentially saying that these rights are so fundamental to our existence that no matter where you are in the world, every human being is endowed with those rights, and that they're inalienable, indivisible, and cannot be taken away. So that every country essentially has a provision in the Constitution dealing with fundamental rights and freedoms. And they have particular importance to you because under Section 16 of this Constitution, it provides that you can bring an action to the court if these fundamental rights have been infringed. And this is what Section 16 is saying. That's why it is important that you pay attention and understand this. It says that if any person, means any of you, alleges that any of the provisions of Section 2 to 15 here of this Constitution has been, is being, or is likely to be contravened. And I'll just go to the end of that section. It says, may apply to the High Court for redress. So that's very powerful. That any of your rights, it has been infringed, or it is being infringed in the present, or is likely to be contravened in the future, you can apply to the court for redress. So it's no matter how much money you have in your pockets, or if you're rich or poor, if you're black or white, essentially you can apply to the court. So every day people apply to the High Court under those provisions for redress. But what is important is we are refining it to expand on those rights and freedoms that affect you. So listen to this. That the concept of discrimination be widened to include expressly age, place of birth, ethnicity, religion, social class, disability, language. So what this means is that you cannot be discriminated against solely based on the fact that you're disabled, or that you're younger, or based on your age, or based on your religion. So if you're a Pentecostal, the government can't pass a law targeted at Pentecostals saying, well, because you're a Pentecostal, this doesn't apply to you, or some benefit doesn't apply to you, or whether you're a Seventh-day Adventist, for example. So that is very important for your rights and freedoms. The second refinement says that a person who is arrested or detained be expressly assured the right to be informed with sufficient particularity of the reasons therefor, and the right to legal representation, both without delay, after being arrested or detained. Now we know that many times the police may, or we would have heard of the police arresting persons, not informing them of their rights, not telling them the reason why they were arrested, not telling them that they have a right to a lawyer. We are saying that this shouldn't be, and although the current laws address it in some way, we want to elevate it to the Constitution, give it constitutional prominence, so that thereafter every Grenadian is aware of this right. And it is expressly stated in the Constitution. Refinement number 3 says that every person shall have the right to enjoy intellectual property rights against organs of the state, other public authorities, and private persons or entities. Now, how many of you have heard of the concept of intellectual property? Anyone? Anyone? Well, I'm not surprised that none of you have. It sounds very fancy, but the concept of intellectual property means what it deals with creations of the human mind. So ideas that you have, that you can give expression to, the expression of those ideas. So I'll give you a few examples. Let's say you write a book. That's intellectual property, because your ideas become expressed in a tangible form in a book. Or if you sing a song, a calypso, for example. The calypso is the expression of that idea. And so that deals with the whole issue of copyright. You'll see on some books, there's a note saying who has the copyright or is protected by copyright. This is what it means. So in the public education, we're saying to all Grenadians that this is a very powerful concept, that many of the developed countries are looking to intellectual property, to the intangibles for their own development. Jamaica, for example, has a thriving intellectual property industry, the production of reggae, etc. But many people aren't aware that you can protect these things. Calypsonians sing songs and somebody else sing it, or take it from them and get the rewards. Or people just play the songs, they download it, they burn CDs and they don't get the benefits from it. This concept of intellectual property, therefore, ensures that the protection of these ideas are not put in the Constitution and given greater levels of protection. So the idea of intellectual property also touches and concerns the whole issue of the production of some of our primary products, agricultural products, such as nutmeg and cocoa. I'm sure you're very familiar with this. That our nutmeg and cocoa is sold in unmarked bags sent abroad, and the final consumer isn't necessarily aware of where this fine tasting chocolate comes from, because the middleman mixes it with other chocolate from other parts of the world. This concept of intellectual property, if developed and used, if protected, would reinforce the work that we are doing to give protection to those concepts. So we hope that this is an issue that you can support. Recommendation 4 says that no person shall be deprived of the rights and freedoms guaranteed by Chapter 1, except by due process of the law. Again, this is a concept that goes towards the rule of law, good governance, and ensures that we establish a fundamental legal principle in the Constitution. Recommendation 5. I'm sure all of you would appreciate the importance of a free press in a country. The importance of having the press to highlight the ills of society, to question the activities of government, etc. And recommendation 5 reads that the right to freedom of the press be expressly protected, and that the freedom guaranteed by subsection 1 of the Constitution, of this section, shall include freedom of the press. So this is a very important principle that supports and develops our democracy. Refinement number 7 speaks to the quality of children born in wedlock and out of wedlock. And although this concept is somewhat, or is, protected under ordinary legislation, we are now saying that because it is extremely important, we want to elevate it to constitutional prominence in the Constitution. Refinement number 8. And I ask that you pay particular attention to this particular refinement because it has an impact on you. It's something that you can no doubt understand. It affects people in your community, probably younger siblings if you have. And it reads that a child who is born, that every child up to 18 years of age who is a citizen of Grenada shall be entitled to publicly funded tuition in a public educational institution. I want to repeat that. That every child up to 18 years of age who is a citizen of Grenada shall be entitled to publicly funded tuition in a public educational institution. In my view, this is probably one of the most important provisions. Because what it means is that if you're 18 and younger, the government has an obligation, a duty, in essence, to provide free education, to provide free tuition for you. And if they don't, remember I referred to section 16 earlier. And I want to go to it again. That if any person alleges any of the provisions of sections 2 to 16 is being, or has been, is being, or is likely to be contravened, that you can apply to the court, it means that you can apply to the court for redress. There are a few people who are not really informed or probably don't know better, saying, well, we already have this in some regard. I don't know whether you have to pay tuition here, or for example, whether the people in TAMCC will have to pay their tuition or whether the government pays it. But what is important is that the fact that the government pays tuition now in secondary school is only protected by ordinary legislation. So the Minister of Finance or the government can tomorrow decide that you have to pay for your own education, that you have to pay tuition. And the members of parliament, the 15 members, can change that. But when the referendum comes next year, if you support this provision and we change it so that it becomes part of the Constitution, that it becomes entrenched in this Constitution, there's no government that can change it by themselves afterwards. It can only be changed if 2/3 of every Grenadian who's eligible to vote go to the polls and vote to change it. And so it becomes very harder to change. Because my information suggests that there's about 63 to 64,000 Grenadians registered to vote. So it means that 2/3 of these people who will be voting next year will have to vote in favor of this. And thereafter, once it's included, to change it, in other words, everybody will have to vote to change it. So do you understand this point that I'm making? Right now, the fact that there's free tuition is only protected by ordinary legislation. But because the committee understands the value of education, the value of your education, the value of education of the children that you may have, of your brothers and sisters, of friends that you have, and understand the fact that you may come from poor families, not able to afford, we want to make sure that going forward, the fact that education is so important for the development of Grenada, that the state has a duty to pay for this. And that we want to make sure that a government can decide to change it, because a government may be under pressure, things may be bad, and they want to change it. But they can only do so if you vote to change it. So this is very important that you pay attention to. And I ask, therefore, that you think about it, you speak to your friends and others about it, and when the referendum comes next year, that you vote for this change. I also want to speak about refinement number 9 under Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, which says that women are entitled to equality with men, especially as regards opportunities for education, job training, job promotion, and equal pay for equal work. Let me repeat this. That women are entitled to equality with men, especially as regards opportunities for education, job training, job promotion, and equal pay for equal work. If we leave women out of development, if we don't give them the same chances for education and for promotion and equal pay to equal work, it means that we are leaving out a significant percentage, about 50% of our population, out of the whole prospect of development. So gone are the days when we treated women unequally. We give them equal treatment now. And you might be saying to yourself, well, there aren't any areas where women do the same job as a man and get less pay. But you might be surprised to find out that they are, and especially so in the agricultural sector. So my research shows that in the agricultural sector, men and women do the same work in many instances, and they get different levels of pay. So we're saying that we want to change that and expressly change this in the Constitution. So although it may be changed by ordinary legislation, we want to ensure that we give it the highest level of protection, so that going forward, women have the same opportunities for job training, education, and equal pay for equal work. We hope that you would support this, not only the young women in this room, but that the men also give support to this principle. Refinement number 10 speaks of, or guarantees, or provides that you have a fundamental right to vote in elections. Of course, that is, I don't need to spend any time discussing this. This is very important. It ensures, this principle ensures that you are guaranteed the right and expresses so in the Constitution to vote and to participate in elections. This goes to the heart of our democracy. And the final refinement under the fundamental rights deals with, speaks to gender equality again, and says that there shall be a right to gender equality, that whenever in this Constitution there appear the expression he, him, his, there shall be substituted, therefore, respectively, the expression he or she, him or her, his or hers. This might seem trivial to some of you, but women have been repeatedly saying that our laws are written with a gender bias. We speak about man, and of course the interpretation section that man means woman, so wherever man is mentioned, it means woman. But the women have been saying we want our laws to reflect gender neutrality. So when you speak about he, him, or his, you should also speak to she, him, or hers. I don't need to convince you about this. I think that sounds very reasonable to me. So these refinements that I've been speaking about, in essence, form is one recommendation. That's recommendation number 9, which deals with the fundamental rights and freedoms of the individual. So I ask for your support in this. Between now and the referendum, you will have many other chances to have this concept explained to you and to learn more about it. The other important principle that I spoke to you about deals with recommendation number 10 and deals with the directive principles of state policy. It's a new chapter, 1A, a new proposed chapter of this Constitution. Now, what makes this important, and why I am proud of this provision, and why you should be proud too, is that this is a provision which will make Grenada the first country in the OECS to have such a provision in its constitution. And it's a provision that has a direct benefit for you, a direct impact on your lives. Unlike the refinements I spoke to you earlier, where you can go directly to the court if your rights are infringed, this principle doesn't allow you to do that. They are broad rights. So, for example, when the parliament is making laws, when our functionaries in government are creating policy, they will have to direct their attention to this principle. And let me go through quickly some of the important elements of the directive principles. It says, firstly, that the state has a duty to protect the natural resources of the state. Do you think this is a good principle? Any reaction? That the state has a duty to protect the natural resources of the state? Then secondly, it says, The state has a duty to protect and preserve the environment and not let it suffer degradation. It's 18B. 18C says, the people have a right to a healthy and wholesome environment. This is extremely important. Never before in our Constitution were these principles talked about. You may have heard about the issues of climate change and the impact that our activities are having on the climate. The fact that we develop projects, probably without looking at the impact of those projects on the environment, doing the proper environmental impact assessments. The importance of this provision, therefore, forces functionaries in government, when making law or developing policies, doing new projects, to think about the environment. Because it is a directive principle now that the people have a right to a healthy, wholesome environment. Another directive principle reads that subject to the resources in and available to the state, people have a right to adequate, nourishing food. The people have the right to food which is safe, nutritious, and ecologically, socially, economically, and culturally appropriate, and to food producing resources, and the ability to sustain themselves and the society. It goes on to say that the people have a right to potable water, which is affordable, and whose supply is consistent and reliable. We are of course aware that many people, and in some communities, people may not have direct access to water going to their houses. They have to use public standpipe, etc. No, this isn't saying that the government, you can bring an action to the court to get the government to bring water for you. But what it says is that it becomes a directive principle now, so that in conceptualizing projects, in moving forward, government functionaries must take this into account. And that a judge, in giving judgment in a particular case, may use this as persuasive authority. So this is extremely important then for our development. It goes on to say in 18D that the people have a right to good primary and secondary health facilities. So it directs our attention to the whole question of health facilities. I'll just mention about two more. I notice that a few of you are getting restless, but I'll probably be asking some questions afterwards, so you need to pay attention. 18H, dealing with the directive principles of state policy, says that the government should strive to exercise fiscal responsibility so as not to unduly burden the people financially. Let me repeat that. The government should strive to exercise fiscal responsibility so as not to unduly burden the people financially. Anyone can tell me what important event took place yesterday? The Prime Minister did something. There was an important event yesterday. Anyone? There was the budget. So the budget is government's statement as to fiscal expenditure and how they're going to collect monies to run the country. And you know, governments sometimes pass laws, they tax and do many things. This provision is saying explicitly that government has the right or should strive to manage the public finances and not let the country fall into onerous debt. So this therefore becomes a moral principle, a moral compass, a moral guiding principle for the state going forward. And it's something that we ask that you give your support to. I may be losing your attention, and I probably should stop here and try to get some interaction from you and some questions, because I've been speaking for a while, and it's important that you ask questions. You may want to find out how you can get involved in the process, how you can impact upon it, how you can help with the promotion of the ideas, and you may want to ask for clarification on any of the issues. So, I invite any questions you may have at this point. I'm sure we must have one or two questions. Well, you don't have to rush to answer, you could take your time. Any questions?
I just wanted to find how we show the CCJ will be cheaper than the
Most definitely. The CCJ is in Trinidad, 90 miles south of us. I should let you know that the CCJ also, for now, is going to be itinerant as well, which means that if there's a case in Grenada, for example, we may not necessarily have to go to the CCJ to have that case heard, but the CCJ can come to us. So you may have heard of the Shanique Myrie case in Barbados. You've heard of that case? Yeah. A Jamaican who was given an intrusive body search on landing in Barbados, and she had never traveled before, came to Barbados and was given a very intrusive, or subject to a very intrusive body search. It was very humiliating for her. And Barbados, of course, well, that case, although it was brought under the original jurisdiction of the CCJ, because you have to remember that the CCJ is essentially two courts in one. So there's the original jurisdiction, which deals with the interpretation of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which we all are part of, and then there's the appellate jurisdiction. So there are only 3 countries in the region now that are members of the CCJ in this appellate jurisdiction: Barbados, Belize, and Guyana. But the point I want to make is that in that case, the court traveled to Barbados to hear evidence. And then they went to Jamaica to hear evidence in this case. So yes, it will be cheaper because you do not necessarily have to go to the CCJ to have your case heard. The other thing we should note is that already in all the courts in the region, including Grenada, there is equipment set up so that you can have your case heard by video link. And so the judges can stay in Trinidad, and the lawyers and the litigants can remain in Grenada and have their case heard. So that is an important point that you can. Definitely it wouldn't be $100,000 to go to the CCJ. So it is affordable, will be affordable to the common man.
Because it's in the region.
Because it's in the region. And the fact that it allows you, the Privy Council doesn't allow us now to have cases heard by video link. And the CCJ most definitely won't come to Grenada to listen to your case. So that's an important point that supports the whole issue and demonstrates the fact that the CCJ is definitely more affordable than the Privy Council. Any other questions? Someone raising their hand in the back? Yes. Precisely. That's a very good point, a great question. Now, the whole question of the separation of powers is very fundamental to a democracy, is very fundamental, very important for us. As in Grenada, we have 3 branches of government. The executive, which means cabinet. You would of course heard about the recent cabinet reshuffle. Minister Alexander Otway Noel what was she? She was Minister of what? She was Minister of Tourism, and now she's Minister where? No, she's Minister in the Prime Minister's Ministry. And what other changes you know about in the recent cabinet reshuffle? Tell me. Well, yes, he's not he's not president of the Senate anymore. But essentially, the recent cabinet reshuffle is a good example of what cabinet is and who the members of cabinet are. So cabinet set policy. Cabinet meets every Monday, usually, and it's chaired by the Prime Minister. And they can make policy. So cabinet might decide, for example, that there's a policy to, for example, it was cabinet who approved the 12 recommendations of the committee. It is cabinet who will ultimately decide on the date for the referendum. The committee can suggest a date, but cabinet will decide on the date for the referendum. So cabinet set policy. Cabinet can decide that there's a policy for free tuition, for example. So that's one branch, the cabinet. They set policy. They can decide where a road is to be built or not built. And then there's the parliament, which is the second branch. So the parliament includes the 15 members of the lower house. It includes the members of the upper house, which is the Senate. It's the parliament. And pursuant to this constitution, parliament has the authority to make laws for the peace, order, and good government of the country. So parliament doesn't set policy. Cabinet make laws. And a law can only be made if it's made by parliament, amended by parliament. And there's the judiciary. As I said to you before, it comprises the High Court and the Court of Appeal. So it's the judges, the magistrates. And they're co-equal branches of government. You don't want one branch having excessive powers, because that's a very dangerous thing. So, although cabinet can make a policy, and, cabinet makes the policy, and parliament can pass the law. If this law that parliament makes contravenes something in the Constitution, you can go to the court to protect your rights. Remember I spoke to you about section 16? So that's where the court comes in. So I'll give you an example. Let's say next year, God's willing, hopefully, that this constitution is amended and that you agree and you vote in favor of the proposal for free tuition in secondary schools. If that comes into effect, and 5 years later, Parliament wants to pass a law saying, well, no, this is too expensive, free tuition is bad, we want to change that, and they pass that law. Any one of you can go to the court, you can go to the third branch and say to the court, look at this law that Parliament has passed. It contravenes the Constitution. Can you strike it down? And the courts can do that. So they each have their role, and this is important. So the question you ask them, well, why is this important? What this ensures now is that we explicitly put this in our Constitution as a fundamental right. So that it's up there, there's no doubt about it, that we have this separate powers. So that we don't give the Prime Minister too much powers in cabinet. And the Parliament, we want to ensure then that there's this balance is maintained. So this is an important provision that you should support. Any other questions? Someone in the back had their hand up? One of the things I want to let you know is that we will be embarking on a very aggressive public education campaign from January until the referendum, and you will have opportunities to participate in that. We have been doing debate competitions in the secondary schools. If you follow the Grenada debates, we had 8 debates in the secondary schools on Constitution Reform. We recently had a debate in TAM-CC on Constitution Reform and an essay competition. If you are interested, it's something that we can probably do here. We're also seeking support to have or to use the technology available to get you involved as well, to do work on social media. So we'll probably have some competitions for young people. I think the young people in TAM-CC was telling me about a vine. You know what a vine is? No? It's like a short video, 8-second video that you can do. So we'll be asking the young people to create vines on the Constitution that we can post on the internet and have a competition where we will give you prizes on it. So we have many opportunities for you to become engaged in it and to learn more about the Constitution and to use activities that are fun and stuff that wouldn't bore you. So you wouldn't necessarily have to sit and listen to me speak for an hour. You can do research and use these tools to participate in the process. So we are in fact having discussions now with several international organizations for support in that regard. And we ask that you participate in those activities when they come due from January until the referendum. So if there are no more questions, I want to thank you very much on behalf of the Constitution Reform Advisory Committee for allowing me to make this presentation on Constitution Reform. I hope that it was informative and that at least it has tickled your interest to know about the important provisions, know how you can participate. And most importantly, those of you who are 18 years and over, that if you're not yet registered, that you get registered and you participate in the vote next year. So I thank you very much.
Applause. Okay. My name is Cecil Gay, one of the coordinators at this noble institution. And my duty here is to do the vote of thanks. And so, Mr. Robert Branch and your team, we want to thank you very much for coming this morning and to share with us this valuable information. We think it was a worthwhile venture. Mr. James, who is deputy, is also tied up in a very important meeting. The other coordinator, who is Ms. Carol Farrell, other members of staff, and trade much.
You have a question? We will ask it. I thought that you want to ask it. Let me get a question. Okay, let me try to answer the question. The fact is that you have to understand the genesis of this particular intervention in terms of equality for men and women. Internationally, in many countries in the world, women are still being very severely disadvantaged. In some Muslim territories, you know that the opportunities for women or young women to go to school just isn't there. And there was this international outcry when I think as Malaya, either Pakistan or Afghanistan, that the Muslims in her country would have attacked her, and that gained international recognition. What we are seeking to do here is to promote the whole issue of involvement of young women and women generally in the whole process of development. So of course, there still remains in Grenada the whole issue of gender violence, violence against women, when you look at the statistics, that is most likely that women would suffer violence from men than the other way around. So I think the record would show, the statistics would show that in many areas there's still room for development for the law to proactively protect women in many cases. That being said though, there is the increasing voice of men in our society giving voice to what you've just expressed, that there is a view that probably women are being treated better than men, that it favors women. Probably in terms of custody, for example, there is indeed that has been looked at in a serious way. That is why it's the only law. It's the only law that to be made or to be changed, that you, the people of the country, vote on it for the changes to become effective.